I want to welcome everybody tonight. I'm Dr. McFay from Canyon View Pediatrics, and I really appreciate you making the effort to get out here on a Friday night. I've heard there's many more things you'd like to do than be here listening to me, but so your efforts getting out here is greatly appreciated. The presentation I'm going to talk about tonight is called Everyday Strong. It's actually done in connection with the United Way, and this was a big project put on by the United Way of Utah County along with Dr. Swenson, the pediatric psychiatrist who leads the department at Utah Valley Hospital. Because they realized that in Utah County there have been a lot of children who are suffering and struggling with depression and anxiety. And we wanted to bring something that would be very action-focused and very focused to you to help you kind of get the idea of how to help those kids and those loved ones in your life along the way. Now, when it comes to this topic, there's one story I like to share with you, at least I heard once upon a time. So if you'll indulge me, I'd like to share this with you. So one time out in the West Desert here in Utah, there was a couple young boys, and they came to this gigantic hole in the ground. They looked at this huge hole in the ground. They said, "Oh my goodness, this is the deepest hole I've ever seen." And like two young men always do, they said, "You know what we need to do? We need to throw something into this hole to see how deep it is." So they look around, they find this rock, they toss the rock into the hole, and it falls, and it falls, and it falls, and it vanishes out of sight and doesn't make a sound. So they look at each other and say, "My goodness, this is the deepest hole I've ever seen." So they look around and say, "You know what we need? A bigger rock." So they look around, they find this gigantic boulder, and they drag this boulder to the hole. They toss the boulder into the hole, and it falls, and it falls, and it falls, and it vanishes out of sight and doesn't make a sound. They're like, "Oh my goodness, this has to be the biggest hole, deepest hole in the world." So they look around, they said, "You know what we need? Something's a different shape." So they find this railroad tie. And they work together to drag this railroad tie to the hole. They toss the railroad tie in the hole, and it falls, and it spins, and it spins, and it falls, and it spins, and disappears out of sight, and doesn't make a sound. So they sit there thinking about this deep hole in the ground. Like, what do we should do with this deep hole in the ground? As they started thinking about this, suddenly this goat comes running full speed behind them. Bah! Jumps in the hole, falls out of sight, bah! And vanishes. They're like, "Oh my goodness, why would a goat jump in this deep, deep hole?" As they're pondering this goat, a farmer comes up behind them and says, "Hey, have you seen my goat? I tied it to a railroad tie over there." The reason I always like this story, when it comes to this, is a lot of times when it comes to anxiety and depression, we focus so much on the hole, right? The thing right in front of us, that we never see the things that are connected around it, and how really it's not just the hole, it's everything that comes with it along the way. So along with this presentation, and I apologize, apparently there was an overzealous Zumba class at one point that nailed the screen. So if you can imagine this actually works. We're going to focus on today is something put out to kind of be very action and focused on helping kids along the way. And more action-driven than intellectually driven along this way. And hopefully by the end of this presentation, we'll be able to apply this framework to help us all help those people we love in our lives and those children and our loved ones along the way. Now, my personal connection to this story is I actually have 3 children, and 2 of my oldest children are twins, and they're 13 years old right now. And when one of my daughters actually has obsessive-compulsive disorder. And so she was diagnosed at age 5, and so in our house, we've dealt a lot with anxiety over those years, and how it's kind of affected interactions with each other, how it's changed me and my wife's interactions, my children's interactions, has been almost engrossing into everything. So I hope I can impart some of that information and ideas from this along the way. So this first slide kind of addresses this issue. So they did a survey among 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders here in Utah County and asked this simple question. During the last 12 months, did you ever feel sad, hopeless almost every day for 2 weeks or more in a row that stopped you from doing your usual activities? And the first time they conducted this survey was back in 2011. At that point, 13% of kids said they felt this way. In 2013, 17, almost 18% felt that way. In 2015, 21.5% felt that way. And then 2017, just 2 years ago, 25%. They haven't got the results back for the next one, but I would imagine this trend may be upward and going. Now, the reason this slide is interesting, right, is this is not necessarily a formal diagnosis of anxiety, right? If we were bringing these people into a true medical clinic and I take them through all the rigors of a psychological testing, they may not actually be diagnosed with depression or anxiety disorder at the end. But clearly, 25% or a quarter of youth in Utah County feel they have been hopeless or sad for more than 2 weeks to stop from doing what they wanted to do. So even at that very baseline, this clearly shows there's a big issue going on with us. So the question is, what is causing this, right? If you look in the media, there's a cause every single week that comes out. Some people say, well, it's cell phones that cause this whole thing. And I will say there is quite a bit of research showing that cell phones, or smartphones specifically, might be causing this, because when smartphones came out in 2007, almost every year since then, more and more people have been reporting these feelings of depression and anxiety. But does this really fully explain it? Here in the state of Utah, specifically the University of Utah, right? There's been countless and great deal of research showing that the altitude that you live at has a huge effect on whether you feel depressed or anxious. And people who live at higher altitudes, whether it's in Utah or Colorado or even Switzerland in Europe, they report feeling anxious and more depressed. So is it the altitude that's causing everybody to feel depressed and anxious in Utah? There's also research to show that is it the family size? This one says high birth rate, and it's true. Sometimes larger families are linked with higher rates of anxiety and depression compared to small families. But alternatively, there's evidence to show that families that are super small, especially children who live like in children islands, right, where there's not a lot of youth around them, report feeling more anxious and depressed too. So is it the family sizes, right? And ones that's not listed here, right, and big in the news right now, is this idea, is it all the helicopter parenting that's going on in the world, right? Or the lawnmower parenting, where actually parents go through and push all the things out of their way, like we've seen recently with the college bribery scandals, right? Is it because parents are basically taking all these challenges of the kids' life? That's why they're feeling so anxious and depressed. Now, I'd like to say that I really don't know which one of those one is the cause. And probably ultimately, it doesn't necessarily matter, because even if you figure out the cause, it probably doesn't affect or change how you really should address this. And to show this, let's do a little bit of a thought experiment. So let's say you had a friend who was a marathon runner, right? And they had been a champion marathon runner, but suddenly now they're having struggles or issues in getting themselves to compete in races or be competitive. I would ask you, what kind of advice would you give them? Keep trying, right? So you might say, you know what, this is just a motivational problem, right? So you should just try a little bit harder. Very true. That may be good advice. That's true. What else? Right? So you start over, have reasonable goals, right? That might be something right there. True. Very true, too. What else would you might you say? What else could be the problem? Right. Maybe they sprained their ankle, right? Or they tore their ACL, and so they're just not nearly as fast as they once were, right? And that would be a reasonable problem along the way, right? What else do you guys think? Right, so it might be their priorities have shifted completely, right? And maybe they don't care about running anymore. That could be very true too. And this is kind of the thing, right? When it comes to a marathon runner, if you had a friend who was struggling, you might say, oh my goodness, is it a biological problem, right? Did they have an injury, right? They're just not recovering right, right? Did they actually give up? Is something actually wrong with their body, right? You might say, is it a psychological thing, right? Is it a motivational problem? Do they say, do you know what? You just don't have the right motivation. Your sports psychology is messed up. You just don't have that winner spirit anymore. Right? You might say, is it a spiritual problem, right? Do they have a spiritual crisis at some point? And suddenly they just don't have the heart or the faith to run the way they used to, right? You might say to yourself, oh my goodness, it's a social problem. Maybe they're having fights at home, right? Maybe all their support groups collapse, right? Maybe they've lost a loved one, and that's why they can't run as fast, right? Maybe it's an educational problem, right? Maybe they've forgotten how to run. I don't know if that's possible, but maybe they forgot how to run somewhere along the way, right? They forgot all the techniques and things they learned about doing it, right? Or maybe it's an environmental problem, right? Maybe it's the conditions and the timing and the weather and things like that. But the problem a lot of times when we start thinking about this and we focus on the whys or whats, right, is you never quite ever know which one it really is, right? For any specific marathon runner, it could be any one of those. And us on the outside don't necessarily know. Now imagine instead of being a marathon runner, it's a child who suddenly is feeling anxious and depressed, right? Do we really know if it's the biology, right? Is the chemistry in their brain? Is there psychology? They just don't have a good way of reflecting or motivation in their life, right? Is there spiritual crisis in their life? Is the social structure in their life has collapsed and fall apart? Is it that they are not educated? They don't have enough tools to deal with their anxiety and depression? Or is their environment? Maybe they're being surrounded by bullies all the time, and that's what's doing it. But the hard thing, right, is that figuring this out is very complex, and it gives you very little issue, because if you focus on the whys, you don't always know what to do. So if you make assumptions, right, a lot of times you can make assumptions that are wrong, and even though you address those issues, they really don't help the child. And this is what brings us to this. But if you always focus on the needs of the person, right, then you know that you're helping the person that is in need, or you're addressing their need. So let's carry on with this. And this kind of brings on to the kind of part that brings us all together. So looking at this pyramid, if you ever took a psych course back in high school or maybe in college along the way, right? Many people have been exposed to the idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs along the way with that kind of thing. And this always reminds me of another story. Can I share another story? Is that okay? Yeah? Very good. So once upon a time, there was this young one. He was sitting in Ireland, and he was sitting in the pub. And as he was in the pub, he went going to the bar, and he was sitting there drinking all night and having a good time. And as the evening came to a close and the pub closed, he said it was time to go home. So he stood up, he started walking out of the pub, and suddenly took about 3 or 4 steps and fell flat on his face. He's like, oh my goodness, this is embarrassing. So he stood up and he brushed off his clothes, stood up, made it just outside the door, and fell flat on his face again. And he's like, oh, I can't believe this is happening to me. So he stood up one more time, took about another 4 steps, fell flat on his face once more. And he's like, this is just not going to do. So he crawled the rest of the way home and crawled back into bed. Fell asleep, and the next morning came on. As he was sleeping, his wife walks in the room and says, oh, Charlie, I know you've been a-drinking last night. And Charlie says, no, I've not been a-drinking last night, I swear. And his wife says, Charlie, I know you've been a-drinking. The pub just called. They have your wheelchair. And the story always reminds me that a lot of times when it comes to life, we miss out on the simple things that really kids need along the way. So with this hierarchy of needs, right, it builds on the concept that if you address lower needs, that eventually higher needs will be met. To the ultimate point, if they reach the very top, right, every child will thrive, and the actual theory was self-actualize. But in this situation, we'll expect them to thrive along the way. So starting the very base, at the bottom of this presentation, or this presenting thing, you think about the very basic things in life that everybody needs, and that's food, rest, and water. And I bring this one up partially because a lot of times when kids come in, I find that when they're feeling anxious, depressed, a lot of those basic things in life are not being met, specifically rest. Well, a lot of times the kids come in, right, and they're not even sleeping at night. They're playing games or having disrupted sleep patterns. And of course, the next day they're going to feel depressed and anxious if you're not getting enough sleep along the way. So when you look at somebody and you know they're struggling, it's easy to assess and look and say, hey, are those most basic needs in your life being met? Are you getting enough to drink? Are you getting enough to sleep? Are you getting enough to eat? And I know in my house, maybe not in your house, when some of my kids don't get enough to eat, things get wrong in a hurry, right? And having that snack carry pocket to pass along can make a huge difference, right, along their way and make them have a bit more energy and perspective on things along. So first of all, let's say we go through and meet those basic needs, that food, rest, and water. I kind of just bring to the next thing, is that every child or every person, right, needs to feel safe. They need to be safe in their lives. And there's kind of some big domains that kind of come along with feeling safe. First of all, safe to talk. And let me give a scenario, and you guys can give me your thoughts on this as well. Let's say you had a loved one or a child come home from school. And they suddenly said, you got a full, and earlier that day you received an email from the teacher saying this child had failed their class, and that's all you had. What would you say, or would you ask, or how would you approach your child? You'd ask him what happened, right? For sure. How else would you, how would you ask you what kind of approach would you take to ask him what happened?
How are things going in school?
How are things going in school, right? Very good, right? Because, and I saw another hand there, I'm sorry.
I try to get down to like the level and how are you doing? Are things going good at home? Are you sad? Do you have concerns that we need to talk about?
For sure, right? So basically making it so they feel comfortable sharing. Because if you're like me, right, my natural tendency is to fix the problem, right? I see that F on my child's report card, right? I suddenly go into fixing mode, right? It's like, how do I fix this grade so my child gets that A in class? Instead of asking that very important question, how is it going, right? And then honestly taking a moment, to listen, right? Let them get everything out. And the hard thing is, right, in the heat of the moment, if you haven't been doing that for years, it's very hard for a child to express themselves about how they feel. So definitely, it must be important for a child to feel safe to talk about what's really going on in their life. Because they know you're going to blow up or explode, right? They're never going to tell you anything, right? They're going to lock that stuff away deep inside. And this kind of plays in this idea that you also need to feel like you're safe to explore, right? And explore your relationships and values in your life. Like if you're like me, sometimes I have strong opinions about things, right? And I'll pronounce it in my house, and my children will take that as doctrine of how life is supposed to be. Right? And then they think in their hearts, oh my goodness, if Dad believes it's so strong, I could never do that. So sometimes you have to modulate what you believe, sometimes even, right? So your child can feel safe, maybe to express an opinion that's different than yours. And really talk about it, right? So a child should be able to be safe to explore their own beliefs and values about things. And maybe you can present that as you talk about stuff that maybe I believe this, but there are other people who believe otherwise, and maybe talk about why that is. Right? So they understand your perspective and your point of view on things. So safe to explore those ideas. And safe to separate. And this is an interesting one, right? Because you have some kids who want to spend all the time in the world away from their parents, and other kids who want to spend all the time in the world with their parents. But definitely creating a situation where they know you think about them, even when they're away, right? And talking to them and say, hey, I know, just asking about their day and what they've been doing, that you think about what they're doing on their way at school can help them feel safe to separate from you in your life. Also safe to fail, right? Because failure could be a great teacher. And a lot of kids, when I see come in who are so anxious, their biggest concern is they're going to fail or disappoint their parents, right? And so expecting that and talking about how their child may never fail your love, right? They may not always meet what you need them to do, but definitely you would never reject them for a failure in their life. So creating a situation or a space where it's safe for them to fail and learn from their failure can be powerful. Also, where it's safe to be them. Now, this is a challenging one because, right, you might grow up your whole life being a BYU fan. Then your child comes home and announces they're a Utah fan. And like, what are you going to do with that? Are they safe to be them? I don't know. Depends on your situation, right? But being safe to be you, and that's a flippant example, but there's a lot of things where they might express a completely different view than you do, right? But creating that space where they can safe to explore that and have that moment. It's safe to feel. Because a lot of kids, right, they get things they trap deep inside, right? And they just don't want to have that expression outside. But creating a situation where you can honestly let them express how they feel, right? And withhold judgment. And that's the hardest thing, I think, in these situations, is withholding judgment, right, till they fully get it all out. And then maybe you just don't say anything, right? But make it so they feel safe to express things to you along the way. Because if a child then feels safe, this kind of brings to the next component that comes along with this. If a child kind of feels safe in their connections, or safe with people, in their life, safe to feel, safe to explore, then they can start feeling connected. Because this is the most common phenomenon question I've actually get from people. Is that as they go through life, they don't feel connected. That because they don't feel safe to share their ideas and thoughts, they feel almost disconnected from this world around them. So the question is, how do we get them to feel more connected and interacted with people along them? So one of those things, right, could be like that, is being connected by feeling seen by those who have loved you, who are loved around you. And a lot of times it could be by asking those simple questions, right? And then taking an honest interest in what people are saying to you, right? As you say, sit around the dinner table. You ask about your child's day, or making it a habit to even have dinner together at night to create those awkward or simple situations where we can talk about what's going on in their lives. And asking about what's going on in there can make them feel more connected to you along the way. And then another one you can do is connect by apologizing. It's not up there. But connecting by apologizing can be a big thing. Because if you're like me, I'm not a perfect parent. Never raised my voice at my child and screamed at them in a way I did not think was right at the end of the day. The answer is absolutely yes, right? So when I feel those kind of things, right, going back to your child and honestly apologizing to him and saying, you know what, that was wrong, right? It was wrong for you to yell at me, but it was wrong for me to yell at you too. And owning up to it, right, can make them feel like, yeah, my needs are being heard and I can feel connected to the world around me. With that kind of thing. And then connected by enjoying small moments. Now this is interesting, right? Because connecting through moments is a very powerful thing, right? Whether it's having the family dinner, whether it's playing a board game together, whether it's actually going out and doing yard work together, finding situations where you can do things side by side. Now this is where it gets tricky, right? Because a lot of times we want kids to enjoy things that we enjoy, right? We want them to enjoy things on our terms and what we do in our lives, right? And it's sometimes hard to figure out what do kids really enjoy doing, and then finding a way to get involved with what they enjoy along the way. So, for instance, if your child's only interest is Fortnite, and that's the only thing they ever want to talk about, perhaps getting at least a working knowledge of Fortnite so you can engage in a brief conversation with your child about Fortnite is maybe some time well spent. And that's the thing, is definitely taking it to their level. Because people feel connected when you talk about things they are interested in, right? They don't necessarily want to hear what you have to say until they know that you're interested in what they have to say about life. So taking a few moments to connect about the things that they find most valuable in the life, even if you yourself may find them silly or frivolous along the way. With that. And then also persistence. And this is where the hardest thing is there's going to be some days where everything comes together and you and your child or you and your loved one are going to connect and click, and it's going to be this perfect day, and you're going to chalk it up and say, my goodness, I had this whole thing figured out. then sure enough, the sun will rise in the next day, and you're going to hate each other's guts again, and you're going to figure out what happened overnight that suddenly we just don't see eye to eye anymore, and we're loggerheads with each other. And that's a lot of times what it is. It's about persistence, is that knowing that every day can't be perfect, but that if you keep trying to hear a little bit about their day, that you own up to your own problems, mistakes in that relationship. If you ask about what's going on, if you make those efforts to make those small connections, whether it's at the dinner table or whether it's out in the yard doing yard work, or going on a fun family trip, or going out and playing in the park, those little connections can come along the way. Those kind of things. Those kind of things. And one simple thing, that my wife is actually exceptionally good at, right, is that sometimes kids hate to talk about how they feel, and she'll often write them just a little note, right, that they'll find in their school lunch or someplace else like that. So even though I know they come home and that probably at some point during the day they read that note and thought, yeah, my mom cares about me, and I feel just a tiny bit more connected to that person along the way. Those kind of things. Now, if a child feels safe and then connected, right, this then hopefully helps us to the point where if they feel safe, connected, they can start developing then confidence in what's going on in their life. So number one, when it comes to building confidence, right, it's about helping a child feel independent in what they do. And this can be exceptionally challenging, right? Because one of the biggest things you can do is learn how to trust your child. Because if you're like me, right, and that child brings home that bad grade at school, I fly into fix-it mode. I want to try and fix the problem for them, right? But if I fix that problem for them, does that really actually help them at all? And the answer is probably not at all, right? But trusting that child, right, maybe giving them some advice on how to go back to school and solve the problem they own, and trusting that they actually can solve that problem, can then give them more confidence to address the next problem. And so some things you can actually even do with this building trusting and confidence is like role playing, right? Kids, like when they're young, the main reason they play so much, right, is the role play and solve these problems, right? When kids play house or play army or play work or whatever they decide to play, they're practicing conflict resolution in a very safe environment, right? They're practicing how to negotiate all these things in a safe environment. And so definitely, even with your child, as you play games with them, you could say they're playing a game of pirates and you want to join in their game of pirates. You could even throw in segments or ideas about how they could overcome different problems as their pirating goes on, right? They can then apply into real life. Because even out of my personal practical experience, right, I think about how in medicine, specifically, we spend so much time doing drills or fake things along the way, right? We go through simulated patients. And then a lot of times, when the first time you meet a real problem, the only information you had to pull on is that time you pretended to take care of a patient like this. And you're like, oh, because I pretended, at least I have an idea what I'm supposed to do. So definitely taking that time to kind of role play and play through those ideas and show confidence. Then also taking time, like with your child, like when you remembering things they've done. Because what you'll notice most importantly with a lot of young people is they forget their successes almost instantaneously. And they forget, and they remember all their failures almost always along the way. So taking time and talking about times in the past with them when they've been successful, and even in casual conversation, not when they're in crisis mode, but just on an ongoing basis. Say, hey, remember that time you were able to solve that problem with your teacher and get your grades up on your own, right? Just bringing these things up kind of helps reinforce those memories. Because for whatever reason, negative memories are far more sticky in almost all our minds. We all remember the negative things almost constantly and forget all the successes we have in our life. Especially when we look at other people, we tend to compare our negatives with their positives. Well, they're probably doing the same thing to us. So helping your child pull out those positive memories and remember them along the way about times they succeeded can help them definitely pull this all together along the way. And then finally, one thing that sometimes can help kids feel more confident, right, is like naming the problem that's in there, right? Like if it truly is like an anxious or depressed feeling that's causing them to feel this way, simply naming it for them and saying, hey, this is your anxiety. And some people even give it a name, like they might call their anxiety the bully or stinky or the poop head, whatever you want to give it, right? And then say, hey, this is poop head making you feel this way. And that way, it's not the child who has the issue, right? It's you guys combating poop head together to make them build a challenge and face that problem together, that kind of thing. So naming the problem can make it kind of go outside yourself and make it something you can fight. Now, this is the hardest part with this, is that if you do those things, you have to almost have a leap of faith that they'll thrive and succeed. And the thing is, it's not an overnight thing. It's not as if you suddenly pull this off for like 3 days in a row, they're going to always automatically fly and soar. But if you keep doing these things over and over again, they'll put them in a situation where they can thrive and excel on their own and have that confidence they can pull it together. Because ultimately, almost all, I would say almost all, but probably all children want to be happy, right? And if you can trust them to do it, they'll strive to have those goals in their lives. And if you trust that when their actual needs are met in their life, right, if they feel that sense of safety, connection, and confidence, that they will thrive, they will truly thrive. And that way, as a parent, you can go away from trying to figure out, is it the cell phone? Is it the altitude? Is it their neighborhood you're living in? Is it their set of friends? Right? It gives you some things you can actually function on and act on to address in their life. And that way, you're not trying to fix their problems, but remove those barriers to help them feel more confident and successful in their lives. Now, this is a little bit of a side note, and I think this can be somewhat helpful to kind of think about how we can apply these things. So when it comes to a child, does a cell phone undermine basic needs for feeling safe, connected, and confident? And I'll say also, does it actually fulfill it? And I'll throw that out. How does a cell phone undermine those needs at times?
Distracts the adult.
It distracts the adult, right? For sure, right? The adult can feel distracted as they sit on their cell phone, and the child says, hey, look at this, right? So the child feels that they don't actually feel connected. Very true. Right? That's very true. If you've ever been like me, you're sitting at the restaurant enjoying a nice meal, the child starts acting up, and you're just like, is you can enjoy that final few minutes of conversation with your wife together, right? Or something like that. That's very true. What else do people think? And that's very true, right? It's very easy to get caught in that thing because living on a cell phone is very rewarding to the brain, right? So you kind of do that, so it kind of numbs you out along the way. That's true.
I think cyberbullying is on them, isn't it? Like their ability to feel safe.
Yeah, there's a huge safety issue that comes from that too, right? Because that child just can't put it away. There's a constant influx of things coming along, right? So it might be affecting their sleep at night. The challenge, I think, with a cell phone, though, is for a lot of kids at the same time. This is maybe a cautionary thing. If you're thinking about going home, take your child's cell phone away right now. Is for a lot of kids, the cell phone is actually fulfilling a lot of these needs of feeling safe and connected because they're connected with all their friends at the same time. So if you're suddenly going to rip a cell phone out of your child's hand, you probably should have a very good action plan how you're going to fill that void of feeling safe, connected, and confident in their lives along the way. Very good. Because that kind of basically could have helped those needs along the way. Because basically, if you're going to take that cell phone away, make sure that their needs are being met. Because I will say, just as a bit of a cautionary thing, that for whatever reason, like a lot of times when kids have come in complete crisis into my clinic, it's usually been when the parents have taken their cell phone away or taken something that they feel like they're being cut off from the world. So be very cautious just ripping something that's making them feel connected to their friends or their other support group out of their hand. Even though it might be doing harm, it also is fulfilling some of those basic needs of feeling connected along the way. Very good. So basically, as we do these kind of things and work through these thoughts, these experiments, right, our goal is to feel connected, safe, and confident. Now, I'll throw this question out to you, though. As you've dealt with your loved ones throughout life, what kind of things have you guys done to feel safe with each other?
Probably gone through something together and felt supported with one another, and then you feel like, okay, if something else happens, this is my person, or this, there's a connection.
Right? Definitely. I think that's a very powerful idea, right? That as you go through life, right, and you actually experience a challenge together, and then you overcome it together, it definitely brings you together, right, and closer and closer. Just like if you think, I can solve these problems on my own, it probably might pull you apart. The opposite is true. We're good. Other thoughts?
I think one way is like, if something's happened, like coming out with a gentle tone, sort of like working up to it. Like, I think about how often like a kid comes and you just sort of just like jump right to like sort of angry mode. With the spouse, we know it's like way more effective to kind of ease into it, go gentle, and they feel like they can express themselves.
Right? That's so true, right? A kind word turned away wrath, I think they say somewhere along the way, right? Especially going into a gentle tone, right? Creates that sense of connection, right? Because suddenly they know they're not going to be threat. They feel safe and then they feel connected at the same time. Very good. Other thoughts?
Showing that you can be vulnerable to going to them for help, initiating contact before you need to have contact.
Very true, right? Feeling vulnerable, right? Like kids rarely come to us, right, and say, I feel like I need a hug today, right? Maybe they do. Some kids are not like that. But very rarely do kids say, I need to be helped today. So being vulnerable to them and expressing your feelings about things first, right? Even though sometimes it really is hurtful to be rejected by your child. I don't know if you've ever been rejected by your child. But it is hurtful, like when your child says, nah, I don't want to spend time with you today, Dad, right? But making that risk, going out there and say, well, I want to spend time with you. Maybe if they say no, you don't force the issue, but knowing that you keep making that offer over and over again, even though it gets rejected sometimes, right? So being vulnerable is very powerful. Very good. Other thoughts?
Taken a sincere interest in something that they've been passionate about. So that we share that interest together. And we've learned from them, they've learned about it.
And
It's been a source of joy.
very good. And what was it this case that you guys took a sincere interest in?
Our older son got interested in theater for one thing, and that kind of opened the avenue for us. He also got interested in medieval history, and so when we share
That is a very perfect example, right? Because maybe not theater is not everybody's cup of tea, right? But in that situation, you took an interest in theater. Something that may not be natural to you, right? But as you learned about it, and often, honestly, it doesn't probably take tons and tons of knowledge, just a little bit of knowledge, to have like a real conversation with them and make them feel that you've gone that extra mile. Make them feel like you've heard them, right? That they're safe to feel and like what they like, connect with them, and then because it did, they probably feel a bit more confident, and hopefully then reach that thriving state in their life. Very good. Any other thoughts before we move on?
Just like talking about the apologizing, I think that's a big one, and helping them to see that we're not perfect, and that we recognize that when we are trying and we expect certain things, but it's okay to mess up. It's not apologize. We're all trying.
And I think that's very powerful. Thanks for sharing that, right? It's very hard to apologize, especially when you're the person in the power and authority position, right? It's hard to go to somebody who technically is your subordinate and say, you know what, I was completely wrong, right? But definitely when people know that you acknowledge you're wrong, because I can't count the number of times my kids come to me and say, Dad, you think you're so perfect, right? And honestly, I know I'm not that perfect, but they get that perception. Sometimes I think that all my ideas are so right? But obviously, sometimes they lead to conflict and problems. So when I can have that insight into my own actions and apologize to them, it makes the child feel more connected. Because it is interesting, when you actually come back and have a fight, but then come back together, most people actually feel more close or connected after the apology is said and through. So you actually can bring it back full circle. Very good. So what we're going to do now is a bit more interactive. I'm going to present some kind of samples and examples of scenarios, and then you guys tell me what you guys would do and how we can approach it and what we could do to kind of make this come together. So this first scenario, let's say May is a teenager who's been showing, well, that's perfectly right down the middle. Also, I'll read it out loud. May has been showing low frustration and tolerance, even some aggression, repeatedly over the last several weeks, including throwing a volleyball at a classmate and then throwing a pen at her teacher across the room. And then it says at the top, is that a problem? Yeah, okay. So we all agree it's definitely a problem. If so, what can you do? Yeah, right? So definitely you can reach out to them, right? Make that situation, you can actually ask them, hey, what's been going on, right? It might definitely like make that safe environment for them to kind of connect and share with you, right? You also be able to get their physical needs. Maybe they haven't been sleeping for the last 5 nights in a row because they've been up playing Fortnite all night. Right? So you might consider and say, hey, maybe I should do a little bit of detective work and see is there something that's changed in their behavior. Because we're assuming this is not typical behavior for May. If it's always been this way, maybe it's a different issue altogether. But with that said, if it's a new behavior, is there something that's changed, right? Have you made that connection? Along the way, does she feel safe? Is there something actually making her feel unsafe in life, right? Along the way, right? Could you explore a couple questions? Is somebody bullying you at school? Right? Did you have a fight with one of your friends? Right? Did you fail a test? Did you lose something? Did you, I don't know, it could be countless things, couldn't it? Right? That could basically threaten their safety, right? Do they feel connected, right? Because maybe that, for whatever this week, they're feeling like they don't know anybody in the class. They feel like that person who is somehow discombobulated, not connected to anybody. Right? Exploring that need. Mm-hmm.
A very good book that I have read is titled, Please Don't Label My Child.
Mm-hmm.
It's by a doctor from Canada, now living in Colorado. I think his surname is Shannon.
Mm.
And he goes into considerable depth about the quality of diet, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
and exploring safety and connection issues.
Oh, very good. That is very perfect, right? I like that. Thanks for sharing that. So when it comes to these things, right, feeling connected, right, and say how we can explore their connection areas, right? Or is she confident, right? Maybe she's supposed to be on the volleyball team, but she's not having a very good season, so she's upset, and that's why she decided to throw the ball at somebody, right, along the way. But making sure she has confidence is being met. That she feels confident in what she's doing along the way. Good. All right, so we'll have another one. So we have Nathan here. Nathan is very involved in school. He's extremely social and spends lots of time with friends, but when he gets home, you overhear him telling his sister that hanging out with his friends hasn't been the same lately, and that he feels that even when he's surrounded by people, he feels all alone. So what do you guys think? How would you address his physical safety, connected, and confidence issues?
Same things apply, you need to make sure his basic needs are met. Sleep, food, feeling connected
Good
with his
family,
is he feeling loved?
right? So kind of sitting there and listening to along the way. And that's what the interesting thing is. Like, as you look at these problems, suddenly what seems like a very complex and hard question becomes almost repetitive, right? Because it's very easy to start thinking, wait, are his physical needs being met? Is he feeling safe? Is he feeling connected? Is he feeling confident? Instead of thinking, oh my goodness, it is the cell phone, is it the mountains, is it the family, right? It's only these simple things you can ask and explore over and over again. Right? Does he feel threatened? Does he feel heard? Does he feel valued? And does he convey confidence in himself? There we go. Very good. So this is a little bit different. So let's say Carter has always loved spending time with his friends, especially playing baseball. But during the last several weeks, however, Carter has been keeping to himself during recess and says that he doesn't like baseball anymore. So I question, what would you do then? Would you tell him that he has to play baseball because you know he loves it? Would you set up a special activity with all his friends and make sure they were invited to come over and play baseball? Would you sit down and ask him how he's feeling and listen to his concerns? Absolutely, right? Or is there other things you might consider? Probably other things you might consider, for sure. Go talk to the coach, right? It's like, my goodness, did he get hit in the head by the baseball? No. Very good. And let's say we have Julia. So Julia is a 17-year-old whose behavior is increasingly difficult for her parents to manage. She refuses to follow rules, is falling behind in classes, and isn't attending church with her family. Her dress seems increasingly inappropriate. Family relationships are now very tense. So what could you do in this situation? Would you take her phone away? Maybe, but maybe not right away, right? At least have a good plan in place before you do, right? Right? Would you restrict access to her friends? Your friends are a horrible influence in your life, so you can't be with them anymore. Control never works, right? Maybe some friends in the situation, maybe, but right? It's something to consider, but maybe not always the best reaction. Work on a communication style, right, that might make Julia feel safe, even if it's not your natural communication style. Probably, right? That probably would help in the situation, which is hard. Right? And then discuss what the rules are for the family and expectations, like in a religious setting. Or I guess you can always try this approach too. Offer bigger and bigger rewards for your child's behavior to be what you want. That's probably not going to get you where you want, though. But it's a very common approach, right? That if I offer something big enough, this child will right the ship and come home. Very good. Okay. Now this one's a little bit different. So school is very important to Ashley. Her teachers appreciate her dedication, but have noticed that Ashley will often come to school tired and with circles under her eyes. When the teachers ask if she's okay, Ashley responds that she stays up late finishing her homework because she has to get A's so that her parents are happy. So what would you guys do, right, if your child came home and said to you, I stay up all night studying to get A's because I want to make you happy? What would you say to them? What about your happiness, right? Right? That's a very good point, right? But you might say, I love them unconditionally, no matter what your grades are, right? So they can have that connection. right? Because you want to know, like, maybe what did I say along the way that created the expectation that the only way I'm going to be happy, right, is if you get A's, right? Because I can tell you right now, probably happiness should not be dependent upon your child's A's, because that's going to lead you for a world of disappointment, more than likely, right? But you have to figure out, like, what have I said during the last, 10 years or 15 years that created this expectation that was done? And maybe ask yourself along the way. And if you figure it out, maybe even apologize to them for saying, I never wanted you to feel that way, right? Because you never know, like, when a half offhanded comment you made is what set this whole belief system up for them along the way. So that's a very good point, right? Figuring out exactly why they feel that way. And this last one right here, Kerry has been very irritable around her family and her friends. She gets upset with her parents and asks her to help the younger siblings. And she often exclaims that no one understands what she's going through. What could you care for in this situation? How would you might say, hey, how could I care for her safety, connected, and confident issues? Right? Playing the little bit of a fool even, right? I had a good friend who said, it's sometimes good to be Columbo, right? And even if you have an idea what's going on, you kind of play dumb, right? So you can get them to open up, right? Maybe, is that a weird reference, Columbo?
See, now, I don't know anything about operating on anybody. I don't know anything like that, but with this fellow's heart condition the way it was, wouldn't everybody just think he died of heart failure?
A surgeon wouldn't make a mistake like that. Dissolving suture is an entirely different color.
I mean, that's that old. It's a great reference. I knew it. Right? You play that Columbo kind of, play dumb just a bit so people could open up. And, like, you let them tell them what's going on, even you know where the story is going or where it's going to end, for sure. That's a very good point, right? Because if you've ever been into a family, families are inherently unfair, right? We like to think the world is fair, right? But some people have a bit more skill, or some people have in a better part of their life where they can do a bit more, right? They're not feeling as challenged. And that sense of unfairness, right? And acknowledging it, saying, yeah, this is unfair, right? And especially during the good times, going to those people and saying, yeah, sometimes this family situation is unfair, but we appreciate you trying so much, right? And acknowledging and remembering how it's been a good thing for the family can definitely help them kind of build more confidence and be a building block instead of a tearing down block in the family. That's a very good point. Thank you for that. Very good. Any other thoughts? Very good. Well, I would say I appreciate all that input, because I think a lot of these things, right, is that no situation actually has always the same exact answer, right? That's one thing that is so true, is that every person truly is unique, and every problem truly is unique. And that's why a lot of times when you try and just put the same answer on every problem, they don't always fit. But if you take time to truly ask these questions, this is Dr. Swenson, who actually helped put this together. He said, if I would love it if parents would ask themselves every day, what can I do to help my child feel safe, feel connected, and feel confident? Because when they meet these needs, their child will be more resilient. We're building resilient kids. And I have no doubt that's true, that as long as you make children feel safe, confident, and connected, they will have more resilience, right? Because it's a foolish thought to think you can go through life without feeling stressed or overcome or overwhelmed, right? You can't be on this earth without being challenged by things that make you feel uncomfortable or sad or depressed or overwhelmed every day, right? But if you feel safe in your overall environment, right? If you feel connected to the people around you, if you feel confident in some of the things you're able to do, those challenges don't seem quite so bad. You have a reason to hope that maybe you can pull things back together, and you have a reason to believe that you can make it through, and that will help you to thrive in all you can do and all you can succeed. Very good. And so this information, this is the end of the presentation. I really do appreciate all the participation, because I think this really brings us together, right? When we share our ideas and thoughts, we all feel more connected in this room, right? And I appreciate that many of you felt safe enough to share ideas. Some of them were very personal along the way. And I hope as you got done with this, you feel a bit more confident in dealing with those people around you, because you definitely will have more confidence as you have those needs met in your life. Now, all the things we talked about today are available online. If you wanted to look this stuff up, you would simply Google United Way Everyday Strong, and you could find this. You could find this presentation, or you can find the handbook to go along with it. Because the thing is, all adults are grown-up kids, right? We all have the same basic needs. We like to think when you grow up, somehow you outgrow these needs, but you do not.
When we get older, sometimes we have more.
Right? That is a very point. I appreciate you bringing that up tonight, for sure. And I hope this presentation has been useful for you, and that's the end of what I have for you today. Any questions or any thoughts or anything else that we'd like to discuss before we bring things to an end. Very good. Well, I appreciate your attention and your diligence with doing this. You have a wonderful night. And I'll be up here for a few minutes. If anyone wants to come talk to me on a more personal basis, I'm happy to do that as well. Thank you.